Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.
Welcome back to We Decide America at the Crossroads 2024 from WBAI and the Pacifica Radio Network. My name is Jenna Flanagan in New York, broadcasting from WBAI all over the Pacifica Radio Network. So it's great to be joined by Egberto Willies, journalist and broadcaster. I'm sorry, I keep wanting to say Wileys. I don't know why my brain is doing that. Anyway. But you're a journalist and a broadcaster with Pacifica's sister station, KPFT, out of Houston, Texas. And you and I actually worked together on Pacifica's election night coverage, right?
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did indeed. That was
I think it was a great coverage, actually, but it was difficult.
Yeah, it was a late night. Well, a lot has happened since then. Seems like years. And the Democrats in Congress are still trying to find their footing as the majority of the party, as the minority party, as the president continues his execution of dismantling the federal government, which of course was envisioned in the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which he of course disavowed during the campaign. So now we hear Elon Musk wants to access all of the nation's taxpayer IRS files. And I guess I'll start off with, are there really two sides to this? Where's the moral outrage from the news media? And is there a possibility that they could be afraid of losing access, kind of like the AP who got kicked out over the Gulf of Mexico?
Jenna, first of all, thank you so kindly for having me here with you at WBAI. Let me just say that I don't think they fear Trump. Really, I don't think this is where the media fear the state is coming for you or anything like that. I think the media fears the corporatocracy is coming for you, because the reality is the government. There's no government. There's a corporate state being controlled by the major players, vis-a-vis the billionaire Elon Musk, who runs four major corporations. We have, if you sat at the inaugurations, it wasn't Trump's cabinet behind him per se. It was a whole crop of billionaires, some of them who previously purported to hate this guy. So no, the reality here is we have a purchased government. And the reason the news sounds so normal is because for them, this is normal. The government can be a democracy, but corporations aren't democracies. Corporations are by definition autocratic, and that's what we have.
Aha. All right. So then, based on what you just said, then how does that impact, I guess, like the reason why the Sunday mainstream media seemed so business as usual is, I guess, it's a weird thing to say, but is journalism less about journalism and more about the corporation that owns the outlet?
Oh, you're a genius. Let me just say you're a genius. Because here's the thing, as far as I see it, Jenna, what you do right here, where you are only responsible to make sure and tell the information as it is to your audience. The only people that you owe anything to is for those people who support a station like WBAI or KPFT, or let's just call it Pacifica Network. We are bound to tell those people the truth. Now, the only people that are bound by NBC, ABC, CBS, especially when they when they no longer had separation between the business side and the news side, the only loyalty they really have is to the people who are going to advertise on those channels. So therefore, we don't hear negative things as we should about Medicare Advantage, which is a fraud, We don't hear negative things about the medicines that are put out there, the pricing that control them. The American people don't know that the reality is that most medications aren't researched by corporations, but actually researched by your dollar, my dollar, the audience who's listening's dollar. They are the ones who developed the precursors. They are the ones who created the innovation. And then the corporate folks come on in and take it all over. The news media should be telling all that kind of stuff to the people so that they can make educated decisions when they elect their people. But most of the people, if they don't hear if they don't hear the news from you or myself or others, they don't know that.
Well, give us some, I know what my background is and how I got here, but just so that the audience better understands, give us a little bit of your background. Like, what is informing your point of view to ensure that you put truth first over corporate interests?
Okay, let me just first say that I'm a nerd. Okay, I came up here
right here, yeah.
I came to this country from Panama back in the early 80s, and I'm an engineer, and all that I have ever cared about were numbers. Well, not really, but you know what I'm saying. I am led by numbers, and when things don't, and the engineering methodology is that of reasoning, that of critical thinking. All these things come into an engineering methodology. And when you hear certain things in the political realm, it simply makes no sense, the way they put it out. Why are we, when we learn about the distinction between private sector, public sector, it never computed with me. So, after I decided to leave, the private sector per se to become a journalist per se, I was able to do this where there was no overbearing master that I had to appease. I could just come out and tell things the way they are. Right now, we have to give some grace to our journalists because, again, they do have a master. We have the freedom of being able to tell the truth.
Yeah, there's definitely a distinction there. So one of the things that, first of all, going back to your point about engineering, though, because that is very much a word or a job title that is in the zeitgeist, because of course we know unelected co-president Elon Musk has been claiming that it is his understanding of engineering and data and numbers that is driving a lot of his decisions in Washington. And just considering that you're both engineers, I'd love to get your take.
I love that you asked that question because as you were asking that, I wanted to make sure we give accurate information to our audience. Elon Musk has a Bachelor of Arts degree in physics and a Bachelor of Science in economics. Remember, anybody can call themselves whatever the hell they want to call themselves. Okay. But engineering has a particular method. And the truth of the matter is, what Elon Musk has shown is he doesn't go by engineering methods. Let's give a perfect example. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That's a very famous ethos that engineers go by. Every action has a reaction. Every time you put a chemical, if it has a valence electron out, there's going to be a reaction. If Elon Musk was a real engineer, he would have known that doing certain things he's purportedly there to support Donald Trump, who has a MAGA base. If Elon Musk was an engineer, he would have known that cutting certain parts of USAID would impact food delivery. Food delivery many times come from the center of our country, the grain belt. And he would also know that the grain belt is where the MAGA base is. So an engineer would have known, well, if I am making changes, I have to surgically understand where these changes are going to make so that it doesn't affect my Führer, the Führer being Donald Trump, of course. But there are two options here. He's not only a poor engineer, but he's also he doesn't have critical thinking abilities to know that. It's either that or he simply does not care about the peons that got them to the White House. And let's make sure that all Americans know this. Donald Trump had never won 50% of the American people. So while they're basking and stating that they've won 50% of the votes, no, They've won 49 point something percent of those who voted, who breaks down to under 30% of the voting American public. So there is no mandate there. And it's something that Americans should be aware of when they try to give the illusion of a mandate.
All right. So getting back to your op-ed, and you mentioned that you wrote, I should say, quote, old journalism required balance and equivalences between sides. Issues were not wrong or right. They just were. Small government versus big government is not a discussion between wrong or right, but between different ideologies Americans had to choose. While many issues fall under that mantra, some are simply wrong. The inability of mainstream media, the Democratic Party, and other organizations to enlighten public opinion is because they do not speak to the striking language of truth versus the striking language of lies. That, I think, is a question that a lot of journalists, at least that I know, who are working with legacy institutions are struggling with. What do you do? How do you tell a story that represents two different ideologies when one of those ideologies is flat out lying to you and gaslighting and all the other manipulations?
You just name it. You just name it, Miss Flanagan, Jenna. You just named it. The reality is, if it's a lie, it should be stated as a lie, not this side says this and the other side says that. There are certain things that we know are lies. I mean, when it comes to big government, small government, if I want small government, I have to understand that, well, there are sacrifices that people would make otherwise. If I want large government, there are other types of sacrifices that are made. That is something that's debatable, that we should have an argument, a discussion about, and we can give each side equal opportunity to tell the story. But when it starts about lying, when Obamacare has death panels, those are outright lies. Those shouldn't have even made it. Let me give one of the best classic failures of the media. When we had Obama talking about when they talked about birth certificate, right? Here's the thing: if one accepted that Obama's mother was an American from Kansas, the discussion was over. Because birthright citizenship means you have one parent that is it's an American citizen. So that discussion should have been over. Whether Obama was born in Kenya, Thailand, or Hawaii, which many didn't realize was an American state, but whether he was born in Hawaii, Kenya, or wherever, he's a natural born American citizen because of who his mother was. That's
okay,
it.
so
End of discussion.
Real quickly though, then that brings up, I mean, if something, and again, as you say it, that is very obvious common sense. But in your opinion, why do you think that never came up? Because again, lots of American women, and I'll be perfectly frank, lots of American white women travel the world, have husbands all over the place, and give birth wherever, and it's understood that their children are American citizens. So how do you think that got lost in the sauce and that point was never brought up as a rebuttal?
For the same reason that Kamala Harris lost. Let me put it this way. Same reason that Kamala Harris lost. First of all, let me tell you, John McCain was born in the same hospital that I was born in. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
I was born in Cocosolo, Panama Canal Zone. But from Panamanian parents, so I'm a Panamanian. I was a born Panamanian. Mr. McCain was born from American parents, but on the Canal Zone in the same hospital, Cocosolo, that I was born in Panama. Okay. Very few people said that. Did anybody really question whether, whether he could be president or not? We also look at Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio was born in, I think it was Canada. And I think one of his parents was Cuban, one of his parents was American. Okay. Same thing. Nobody really made a big issue about, let me see your birth certificate, Mr. Cuban. Let me see your birth certificate, Mr. McCain. Now, when it comes to somebody like Obama, because Obama was a person of color, specifically a black person or presenting as black, not only do the average, Americans take liberties with Americanism, but also the media. The media the mainstream media, that is, should have never entertained the discussion. The only reason they entertained the discussion is because of the lack of respect for people that are non-white. That lack of respect presented itself with Kamala Harris. The economy in a capitalist system, look, the economy wasn't all that good for anybody. It hasn't been good for anybody since 1980. Okay. Now, however, based on the metrics that we have for capitalism, the Biden economy was much better than the Trump economy. But Kamala Harris lost, and the media swung it as this is a economic model. She couldn't talk to the working class, etc. That wasn't the issue. The people knew that the economy was good enough, so that means they didn't have to elect the more competent Black Asian woman. They understood that the economy was fine, so they could take a chance with the moron one more time. Okay. Oh. They could take a chance with the moron one more time. It's the same thing that occurred during the Obama years. I never thought Obama was going to win until somebody canvassed in Pennsylvania, and they asked this white woman, and they asked her who the family was voting for. She turned to her husband. I don't know why. She turned to her husband and said, "Honey, who are we voting for?" The husband returned, "Tell them we are voting for the N guy." Of course, understand this. That's when I knew Obama was going to win, because that guy's personal economy finally superseded his prejudice. It superseded his racism. If we were in a bad economy, we needed a bad economy for people to say, I need to go with competence over a moron. And that is where we are at. We are still in a position where we have enough, not all, but we have enough people in the majority population that they're not necessarily voting against their own interests. They're voting against their own prejudice, or they're voting with their prejudice when they feel voting with their prejudice wouldn't cost them too much.
Except that's not what some people seem to be finding out. I also want to point out, speaking of what you were talking about, the way people vote, we've had several times on the show, the reporter, filmmaker, documentarian, Greg Palast, who did this film, Vigilantes, America's News. Okay. So, just the fact that his film has determined that there were as many as 3.5 million votes that were thrown out, and those were mostly votes from people who were in zip codes that were mostly of color, etc. How do you see that factoring in as well to the political situation that we're in now under Trump 2.0?
I agree, first of all, that there's a good likelihood that if all those votes were counted, that Kamala Harris would have won the popular vote. Whether that would have happened in all those, I haven't spoken to Greg since the movie, but whether that would have happened in all the key states to give her the electoral college win, I am not sure. I would be lying if I said I knew that for sure. But that said, look, if you look at what people want or what they claim that they wanted, the pick would have been, again, she isn't the ideal pick, but in a contest of two, she would have been the choice of not only the majority of the people, but a large majority of the people absent her hue.
That's very, very interesting. And I want to I want to pull another, I guess, quote from your article. And that was, remember when Republicans lied about Obamacare having death panels and throwing your grandmother off a cliff? They do this on every issue ad nauseum. Interestingly, Republican policies truthfully harm Americans and could be placed in graphic language that viscerally gets to the American psyche, yet it is rarely, if ever, done by Democrats, our mainstream media, and other organizations. Why do you think that is? And more importantly, I want you to focus specifically on the Democratic Party. I mean, we've kind of unpacked that the media's got corporate issues.
Right.
But it seems like there's red meat there for the Democratic Party, and yet they're just like, I'm vegan.
You know what is so interesting? If you look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if you look at Maxwell from Florida, if you look at Kazar from Texas and these other guys, they do it. If you look at my friend here in Jasmine Crockett, she does it.
Yes.
The problem is that they don't get the coverage that they should. So a lot of us don't know about it, that what they're talking about. And that's why I talk about us in the independent media have to give these people a platform. But not only that, and they have to accept our platform and stop trying to chase after something that's not going to be there for them. Because the Democratic Party, there are two parts of the Democratic Party. There's a neoliberal part of the party who runs the party, and then there are the progressives in the party who constantly claw their way into, we need to be listened to because we are the ones who the working class and the middle class wants. But the neoliberal part of the Democratic Party is not much different than the neoliberal part of the Republican Party, and they still hold a lot of sway within the party, and they don't get graphic because their masters will not allow them to be graphic.
And is that sort of why? Because I mean, when you talk about who gets attention and who doesn't, when it came to, for the Democratic Party choosing spokespeople, a lot of grassroots activists said you have excellent spokespeople, like you said, in AOC, who is very well versed, not just in the news, classic news hits, but on social media and reaching people where they are. Same thing with Congresswoman Crockett, and yet they both got passed over for people whose turn it was due to seniority
and oldness. They're old and tired. Look, I am not as old as they are, but I'm old enough, and I wouldn't want to run now. I think I should leave that to the Gen Xers like you. All right. Aww. Those are the folks who should be out there doing the work, like we have Crockett doing an excellent job. But as long as you have these old people, Nancy Pelosi and all these guys, I love Nancy, but I'm sorry, she's not up for the job anymore. None of these folks are up for the job. We need fighters now out there who understands what people need. And it's not these old whatever who are actually really owned by the stocks markets and these other places.
Well, just for the record, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, he's a Gen Xer.
Yeah, but he's not. Look, I like Jeffries. I like Jeffries. Okay. Jeffries is very, very smart. And he, I think, would make a good interface between progressives and neoliberals. He makes a good interface, not a good policymaker, but he makes a person who can get the deal done. But if I have to follow somebody, I am an older person and I want my leaders to be Crockett, AOC, Maxwell, and Kassar.
All right. Well, we're going to start wrapping this up here. And so one of the things that, cause again, it's very clear. I think a lot of listeners are going to appreciate that you are very clear and direct. There's not a lot of coded language here. So you write in your article, Republican politicians are killing working class Texans. Can you explain or unpack some of the ways that they're doing that?
Oh, it is clear as day. The Medicaid expansion to the Affordable Care Act gave every state the ability to, for the first 3 years, to get health care for all their citizens, every single one, free of charge, and the government would pay 100%. After 3 years, the government would pay 10%. The state responsible for 10%. The U.S. government pays everything else. Texas chose, instead of accepting that, to simply leave their people without health insurance. And it's not only Texas, but many other red states. They chose not to give them something that would save their lives. And we can go over that as with abortion care as well in Texas. They chose to force women not to get care when they could have a baby being born within their fallopian tubes or anything like that. They chose death over life. And that is what politicians on the left side should be saying. If you want to have an unhealthy life, if you want to have no health care, if you want to have a higher propensity to die, vote for your Republican representative.
All right. Well, listen, one last question. How can people follow your work?
Okay, I have a newsletter that I put a lot of this stuff out on politicsdoneright.com/newsletter, which is politicsdoneright.com again /newsletter. And my name is one of those strange names that, because it's so strange, if you Google me, all my stuff would come up pretty much at the top.
Well, then on that note, I want to thank KPFT's Egberto Willies. I got it right this time.
You got it right, my dear Jenna.
I got it right. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to not only do the newsletter and the work that you're doing, but also for joining us for this great conversation. It was much appreciated.
Dr. Joe McManus is a first-generation college student. He earned his BS in psychology from Florida Institute of Technology and master's in arts in multicultural education from Alliance International University and the PhD in educational leadership from Florida A&M University. He completed the University of Southern California, USC Race and Equity Center's Equity Institute and was a member of the inaugural cohort for the National Association for Diversity Officers in Higher Education Standards of Professional Practice Institute. Served and was the president of the task group in Charlottesville and co-chaired the Southern California chapter of the organization as well. He is the author of A Brother's Insight, Guidance on Defeating Racism and Advancing Freedom. Thank you so kindly for being here on Politics Done Right. How are you doing today, Dr. McManus?
I'm doing all right. Please call me JoJo. Thank you for having me.
All right, JoJo. Well, interesting, JoJo. All right, JoJo. Let's start here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Currently, I'm an executive advisor. I work with presidents and chief diversity officers in higher ed and across sectors, focused on antiracism and inclusive excellence, what a lot of people will call diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been doing this work for over 20 years, been an advocate around these issues for about 35. I grew up outside of Boston in a white flight town on the South Shore. And, that's sort of where I learned a lot. I come from a multiracial, multicultural, interreligious family, and we weren't particularly welcome where we lived. And so there were some challenges, and that was my introduction to these issues.
Now, I think one of the things that I heard that I read is that your parents adopted someone into your family. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yep. When I was about a year old, my brother Casey was adopted. He was just a few weeks old at the time. He's African American, and we grew up just not knowing anything about these things until very quickly everything became about race when we were 4, 5, 6 years old when we started preschool and school. Yeah. Now,
I imagine as a youngster that was kind of shocking to you because, as far as you're concerned, those aren't things that Isn't it true that racism is actually learned, isn't it?
Sure, of course.
And that presents a problem. Look, right now we are in an interesting situation with the current administration, where along the entire spectrum within the government, they're actually destroying the fabric, that DEI fabric that opened doors for a whole lot of people, not as a handout, but as a recognition that other people as well has skills. What are your thoughts as far as where we're going with DEI?
Yeah, well, it's a very challenging time. It's certainly not the first time that there's been attacks against this kind of work. What we call the work has changed over time, of course. Right now, they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm trying to make sure we say it out loud: diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's what they're opposing. Because turning it into an acronym that doesn't mean anything to folks is part of why people believe anything about it. But I think that there's a deep misunderstanding of what the work is. That there's this trying to make it oppositional to merit. And the reality is that diversity, equity, and inclusion, the whole purpose of it is to get us closer to merit-based hiring, merit-based inclusion. And so I think that there's, you call this administration interesting. I don't know about that. Highly problematic. Highly problematic is maybe where I'd start. But I think they also demonstrate why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important, right? When you look at the appointees, Secretary of Defense, secretaries of all these different things, the cabinet, these are folks that are in positions that they are in no way qualified for, right? And, that's what had been the problem over time. That people of color, women, LGBTQ folks were not able to compete. They weren't in the running. So the whole purpose of diversity, equity, and inclusion and the precursors of that is to make sure that people have more of a level playing field. What folks are reacting to, right, is that folks that had extreme privilege lost some of that privilege. And to them, it felt like discrimination. It doesn't make it actual discrimination, but they felt like they were being discriminated against because all of a sudden they went from only having to compete with other straight white men to having to compete with everybody, at least to some degree, right? And that felt some kind of way to them. And so that's where we get this pushback. So what I think is important that we keep in mind is that this pushback, this backlash, this administration is a reaction to progress that was being made. So it's very important to defend the work that has been done and to continue moving maybe through different paths, but continuing to move forward.
Now, you brought up the defense secretary, Hegseth versus Austin. Now, when you compare the records between Hegseth and Austin, well-respected, schooled professional who had a great record in the Army. What do you think it really does to not just diversity, equity, and inclusion, the subject? What do you think it actually does to all the people who invested in moving themselves ahead, and then somebody like Hegseth, who has really no character or relevancy for that position to get it?
Well, it's a perfect example of what I was saying. You know, this is somebody that's completely unqualified for the role by any objective measures, right? And to compare him to somebody that was highly qualified, right? And I'm very well versed in the military and what they've done around equal opportunity and diversity and inclusion. They have this phenomenal organization called the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute that came into being during the civil rights movement when there started to be race riots in the military. And you can imagine these are highly trained folks with weapons, right? So the military understood we can't have this. And they started what they called at the time the Defense Race Relations Institute. And then it became DOMI after that. And I was blessed enough to be able to do my college internship there under Colonel Ronald Joe, who was the commandant. And he's been a mentor ever since. And so I'm very well versed in what has gone on in the military. And the truth is, again, real progress had been made, right? Which was evident in the leadership. And so the pushback in the military is because of that, right? Again, these folks feeling like they're being discriminated against and just saying, you know, we're going to push back on this. And the reality is that they weren't. The playing field was becoming level, right? And I mean, you can do the same thing with a comparison of Marjorie Taylor Greene and, say, Jasmine Crockett or AOC. These folks, there's no comparison, right, at all. And that's the problem that DEI has tried to address.
Explain that to the audience. Give us a background. Taylor Greene versus Crockett and AOC, very well-read others.
Right. I think when you look at somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others that are in positions that they gained, you know, through, the electoral process, which is fine. But these are folks that are not very well educated and that don't bring that to the table. And then you have people like AOC and Crockett and others that are coming in that are very highly educated, that are very well read, that are doing their homework. And they're coming to the table to have real dialogue and try to make progress. And they're being, on the other side of the aisle, they're facing people that got there not through merit, right? And so when we talk about it, they like to talk about DEI hires. I think that we have to really think about what is a white privilege hire, right? And that's the problem. The problem is white supremacy and the privileges, and I call them privilege scraps, right? I talk about this in the book. The reality is that long ago, when there were folks coming together to fight against the oppression that was going on in this new country, you had formerly enslaved and enslaved people. You had people that were dealing with an ongoing genocide against indigenous Americans and even indentured white folks coming together and fighting against who they saw as their common oppressor, right? That's when the idea of handing out some white privileges came into play, right? And there's some great books on this that address this, and I reference a lot of them. But what happened was they started giving out what I think of as privileged scraps, right? To the truly wealthy, having a little leg up in getting into a college and, having a leg up in this way or that doesn't mean anything to them. But what it does is it drives a wedge between communities that should be working together to address these issues in partnership, in solidarity. And it's that divide and conquer methodology has been extraordinarily successful, unfortunately, because they've found, all we need is a wedge, right? So if these two groups are getting together, well, we got to find a way to divide Black and brown folks. We've got a way to find division based on sexual orientation, whatever it might be, right? Those wedges are critical to white supremacy continuing, right? And I think, these are the folks that on one side are trying to point those things out and say, hey, we want a level playing field. The other side saying, no, we like this privilege. We're going to stick with it. And that's the battle that we're dealing with right now. We might take a couple of steps forward, and then we're going to take some steps back because of the pushback. But we're going to keep moving forward.
Well, we have to keep moving forward. It's interesting because what a lot of folks don't understand is that white supremacy, just as well that it harms people of color, it also harms white people. I gave a notion on one of the radio shows that I did where I pointed out that, you know why Tiger Woods is so good? You know why Serena Williams is so good? You know why these folks excel? It's not something genetically innate. It is actually that for them to be on the playing field, they had to be so much better than those that are already there. You have actually promoted the excellence of others just to get on the same field that you are in. And a lot of folks don't quite get it, that it is their racism, the white supremacy that they promote that actually make a whole lot of people so much better than they are, not because of anything other than they had to work that much harder. Why don't you kind of lay that out?
We're in a moment of F around and find out, right?
Right.
And right now, a lot of white folks that voted for the current administration are finding out they don't care about them either, right? They certainly don't care about folks of color or LGBTQ plus folks or immigrants of color. They don't care about the people that they were very overtly saying they don't care about, right? But white folks now that voted for them are finding out they don't care about them either.
Exactly.
Right? And so when you say that white supremacy and oppression hurts white folks as well, it does. And this is the F around and find out moment for them, right? They're starting to find that out. And I think there's always the question of, hey, my life has been hard, and I'm white. And so, I don't think that racism is real. Well, your life may be hard, but it's just not hard because you're white. Mm-hmm. It may be hard because you have low income or because the education that you got from our schools, which are intentionally not great, has not prepared you well. There could be a lot of other reasons. And a white person can be discriminated against. It's all these intersecting oppressions that keep us divided, right? So, for me, we have to start talking to the folks that are finding out and help them understand we are really a lot more alike. We are really dealing with the same folks that are holding us down so that they can, buy their own rocket ships and all these other crazy things that the billionaires get to do. And it's not just the folks that we know are billionaires that we see on the news. There are generations of families that have never worked, right? They call work running their family foundation.
Right, exactly.
And giving money to causes that they care about. That's their work. And so I think it's important that we start to bridge these gaps and understand, think critically about why it is that we've been separated and start to work together. And if you think about movements that have been successful, part of why they've been successful is because they've reached across those divides, at least to some degree. And the Black Lives Matter movement is an excellent example from the very beginning. They were reaching across different divides from the very beginning. So I think that that's going to be the future of this work, is recognizing that we are the vast majority. And if we can get past these intersectional oppressions that get all of us and start to work together in solidarity, that's when we really make progress.
Now, tell us, we need to talk a little bit about your book, A Brother's Insight, Guidance on Defeating Racism and Advancing Freedom. First of all, why did you write the book?
Well, it's interesting. I've been doing this work for a very long time, and I've focused primarily behind the scenes, right? Mm-hmm. Some of that purposefully, because I don't think that, guys that look like me need to be out front of this all the time and have all the attention. So I didn't feel like I needed to be on camera. I needed to just get the work done, policy, curriculum, whatever it might be. And it was shortly after George Floyd was murdered when the video came out. My daughter, who at the time was, 9 or 10, was hearing things from her friends. And she really was confused. And she said, Dad, what really happened? And I said, well, there's actually video of it. So you don't have to believe anybody. You can see what happened. And then we can talk about it. And it was a difficult decision to have a little kid look at this, right? My daughter happens to be biracial, right? Her mother is African-American and Creek. And so these are issues that she has to deal with even differently than I do or her mother does. Right. And she's quick to tell us that we don't know what it's like to be mixed like that.
How old is she now?
She's 14 now. She's a freshman.
Oh, she knows she's the boss. Yeah.
Yes. And she's brilliant. And, she's very thoughtful and cares about other people. So we sat through that. And it was one of those incredibly difficult moments in life, right? To sit there with your daughter and say, and you're basically saying, yeah, this is the world that I'm presenting to you. This is the best we've been able to do so far. This is who we are. And she sat there, she watched it. I've never seen that look on her face. It was intense. And afterward, we're trying to talk about it. And she said, Dad, isn't this what you're supposed to prevent from happening?
Wow.
She said that in a 10-year-old voice. I don't know how to.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, me and Uncle Eddie and T.O. and Auntie Kathy and all these people she knows as family that I work with that are like family to us. And she cut me off and she said, it's not working. She said, you got to do better. And that hit me. She's telling me I'm hearing a call to action from my kid saying, you're not working hard enough. And I didn't know at the time how to work harder. I mean, myself and the people that do this work, we work hard. Right. And hard work is something I value. I come from a blue collar family. I'm a first generation college student. I value hard work and I've worked hard. And to hear that from my kid that it's not working and you got to work harder. So I thought about what else could I do? And, one thing that I've been encouraged to do for years was to write. And I thought, there's a lot of books out there. There's all great stuff. And some friends of mine talked to me and we realized that we should all be writing these books, right? Because they need to hear from people with different perspectives. Because if you write this book about your history and your experience and what you think the future should be, and then I do it, some people are going to hear from you and they're going to relate and they're really going to hear your voice, right? But some people are going to be like, this guy, right? I'm not listening to him, but they might listen to me. For the craziest reason. It could be because I'm from, the Boston area. It could be because I'm white. It could be because I'm a man. Who cares? But if enough of us are saying similar things and reaching enough people, then we can have impact. So that was really the impetus behind the book. And it was tough. I originally planned to write sort of a professional book, right? Something academic. And I worked with a book coach that helped me to understand that it was my story that was unique. Exactly. And that had to be included.
Yes.
And that was hard, right?
Yes.
And, there's some tragedies in my life and that I had to write about in the book that were extraordinarily difficult to write about. But I think that it's been worth it because the feedback that I'm getting from people is that it brought them in. Right. So that's what I'm hoping is it'll bring more people into the conversation. This is really about the reality right now. There is no time for bystanders. No time for bystanders right now. We really need to recognize the importance of other voices, not just those of us that do this professionally all day, but the other folks in the president's cabinet, whether it be a university president, a company president, where are those leaders? And everybody, in the entire organization, all those voices. People talk about, enough whispers, joined together can make an awful loud roar, right? And I think that that's a valuable thing to think about, is that we need those other voices right now while the attacks are on us to do it professionally.
You know what is important? What you said there, we have to be loud now because you know what, Jojo? They realize that they have to be loud because people are starting to come together and they're starting to see that a lot of what they've spoken about is bunk. I didn't get a chance to read the entire book. I have the manuscript, but it's interesting because the one thing that kind of hit me was because of some experiences I had with my daughter in her school when I told her things like, tell your teacher Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. You can't discover what was already there. Right. When you come out with a title like Lies Our Teachers Told Us. Mm-hmm. I love it. I mean, just looking at your table of contents, give it the kind of context that you just spoke about, where they tell you, speak to people, not preach to people, but speak to people. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that the context of that chapter title is that there's a great history book called Lies My Teacher Told Me, right? By James Lowen. He was a Smithsonian researcher, white man, who was working in the Smithsonian, like just going over history. And he realized there was a lot of mythology that we were reading and learning in schools as history. And so he wrote a book that was my favorite history book until recently. I read Black AF History, which if you haven't read that, it is phenomenal. The author is one of the best writers. I don't know him, but it's a phenomenal, I don't know him personally, but it is a phenomenal book. There are history books that are so much more interesting than what we read in school, because the reason that those things seem unrealistic is because they are what we read in school. And most of it is garbage. But the real story is so much more rich. And it's not that there aren't heroes that look like me in these more realistic books, right? But they don't represent those that oppressed people. Right. There were anti-racists from the day that this started. There were that looked like all of us. Right. Fought against it. Abolitionists look like all of us. Those, to me, are the heroes we should study in school. I don't really care about George Washington and his teeth. It's not interesting to me. I don't care what he did with a cherry tree. That's not interesting. Right. What I care about is what was going on, looking at it with a lens of critical thought, of social justice and what we want to see in the future, right? And saying, okay, who are the folks that I want to learn from? Do I really want to learn from Thomas Jefferson and what he did with his life? If you read his journals, he knew he wasn't a good guy. Right? He was doing awful things, but we are taught that he's a hero. Well, I would say that there are different heroes that we should be studying. And some look like you, some look like me, some look like everybody else. It's much more diverse if we look at the actual history.
That is great. And I want to go back to something you said, because I always have an issue with it, because I think folks that look like you, white guys, earlier you said you write the book, you kind of like to stay in the background on this issue because you're white. And I don't know that I agree with that. I actually believe that because you're white, you have to be in the foreground. After all, right now, the problem in America has a lot to do with white men. And I spoke to a group a few days ago, a mostly white group. And what I said was that peer pressure is a powerful thing, and that most Americans are good people. Most Americans are good people, but peer pressure is a you-know-what. Yeah. And you actually, in my opinion, that is, I think when guys like you go out there unabashedly and tell the story, that gives permission to others to join the fold.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear that. And it's partly why I'm, stepping out the way that I am now. It was also, a hard thing for me. A lot of us have imposter syndrome along the way, in feeling like we just don't know enough to be out there, right? And somebody else, whoever's the talking head on television or on podcasts or whatever it might be, they must know more than me. And so I've got to study more. I've got to work more until I know something. But at this time, I'm realizing that now I'm getting into a position where, I have some real wisdom on this and I need to share it. And I need to challenge, not just in an organization I'm working with, or in a community I'm a part of, but I need to challenge people more publicly. And it's never been fear that's held me back from wanting to be public. It's just, I think it was a level of humility, I hope, and just feeling like, look, there's policies need to change. Let me work on that. Right? Curriculum needs to change. Let me write some curriculum. Let me teach in a classroom. And I value all of those things. And so I've spent my career doing those things. But right now, the public attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion and all the branches of that, right, are dangerous. And they are, at the highest levels, but they're also everywhere around us. A lot of this has really stemmed from work in school boards, right? Decision makers that decide what curriculum is going to be taught in a school or not. That's why we have book bans, because there were people actually making progress and getting books that had diverse perspectives in them into schools. And so now we've got bans on everything, right? And it's unfortunate because for me, I think that reading, for a lot of folks, particularly in parts of the country where there isn't a lot of diversity, reading can provide an opportunity for folks to learn. Of course, you hope that they're going to start to engage with folks, whether it be online and then in person. But reading is a window into other worlds that I think that people, can really, really genuinely learn from. And by taking away all of these voices that don't fit the white supremacist model, that's very damaging to the next generation. So we can't just brush that off like it's not a big thing that they're banning books. It's ridiculous in this day and age to be banning books. They're banning children's books about Rosa Parks. They're banning books just because authors are folks of color. And a lot of this, particularly in some of the states like Florida, where you have, they're sort of at the forefront of this white supremacist movement. They're banning books just because they're Black authors. It's very much rooted in anti-Blackness, right? So I'll leave it there.
I think that nails it right there. Now, I always have the same last questions. What should I have asked you that I didn't? What do you need to say that we haven't covered?
Well, there's a couple of things that I think, that it's not that you didn't ask, but it just didn't come up. I think one of the things that we have to be conscious of with these attacks now on diversity, equity, and inclusion is we need to think critically about what they're saying, right? So trying to do away with the whole field. So think about it this way. There are bad doctors out there, right? They graduated last in their class, they're doing bad medical practice. There are there's bad medical practice in other places. That doesn't mean that we throw out the field of medicine, right? Of course, there's bad DEI practice. There's folks that shouldn't be doing this, right? That threw up a shingle because there was some money in it or whatever. Of course, there's bad practice, but that doesn't mean you throw away all of the progress and all of the work that has been done that has been excellent, right? So that's where I think people have to be thoughtful about this. We need to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. And we need to consider, just like any field, of course, there's bad psychologists, there's bad everything. Accountants, doesn't matter what field you're talking about, doesn't mean you throw it all away. I think that's one big thing. And the other, again, I just want to emphasize the importance of folks raising their voice. And that doesn't always mean speaking up in public, right? It means using your talent, right? Whatever your talent is, whatever voice you have in your spheres of influence, use that to push us, in the right direction, to join us in that way.
Dr. Jojo McManus, author of
A Brother's Insight, Guidance on Defeating Racism and Advancing Freedom. His website, drjojo.com. Again, www.drjojo.com. And it'll be in the blog post for this, as well as a direct link to get his book. I'm pretty sure you guys are going to be excited to go out there and get it, because, I mean, this is what we need to do. We all have to be proactive and out there. Jojo, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Imagine if our media did what President Macron from France's President Macron did with Donald Trump. And he did it very civilly and in a good manner. And that is what you got to do with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a liar. And the thing about it is, you wonder if the guy is completely desensitized from people actually knowing that he's a liar.
Do France support the U.S. being compensated?
I support the idea to have Ukraine first being compensated, because they are the one to lose a lot of their fellow citizens and being destroyed by these attacks. Second, all of those who paid for could be compensated, but not by Ukraine, by Russia, because they were the one to aggress.
Again, just so you understand, Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total efforts, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. To be clear, we have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan, because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day, in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loan at the end of the day, and Russia would have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me.
Mr. President,
they get their money back, and we don't, and now we do. But that's only fair.
So yeah, Donald Trump has been lying about the United States spending more money for Ukraine than the European Union. He's been talking about everybody else doing the loans. No, it is only Donald Trump and his minions who are trying to use colonial tactics to take Ukraine's resources away. And, you may say, well, look, America has given them a whole lot of military equipment and bombs and all these things, and they need to pay for it. Well, we have to remember that all that money that goes from the Congress goes right into the pockets of the billionaires who are building the bombs, who are building all these things. So it's just a work program that the United States have here for giving these bombs and killing people over there in Ukraine. It's a money-making venture. So going ahead and saying, okay, we'll give you these bombs, we'll continue giving you these bombs for your raw materials, your rare earths, that really doesn't matter to the United States, quote unquote, because the welfare that the defense industrial complex is getting, they want to keep that line on. Yeah, they'd like to get the rare earths, but as far as United States stopping production, not a chance. Now, Donald Trump and likely Russia has some sort of a side deal, I assume. But I think Congress, when they go back to the defense industrial complex, they're going to say, we are not solely for Trump here. We have to support the oligarchs that are also paying us. And that means Raytheon, Lockheed, and all the other guys that make these defense things. But the most important thing here is to watch how Macron put on his big boy pants and went ahead straight up and told Donald Trump by his actions, man, you are a liar.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please.